Okay, he prohibit us, capital H, that we not sacrifice any of the sacrifices outside. This means to say outside the temple courtyard. This is called bringing up outside, and that is his, Hashem's, maybe exalted saying, take care lest you bring up your burnt offerings. The language of the Sifrei is, I only know about burnt offerings, from where do I know about other consecrated animals? Hence, we learn to say, and there shall you do for all the offerings. Perhaps other offerings are subject only to a positive commandment. Hence, we learn to say, there shall you bring up your burnt offerings. Burnt offerings were included in all of the offerings. Why are they singled out? To serve as the basis for a comparison and to tell you, just as burnt offerings, which are characterized by being subject to a positive commandment, are subject to a negative commandment, so too all offerings that are characterized by being subject to a positive commandment are surely subject to a negative commandment. So here he's doing what we'll call bookkeeping. He's trying to explain why he's including this as a negative commandment. He's being directed to do that from the Midrash, from the halachic Midrash. This is often the case, that he's taking his cue as to which ones to include from the Sifrei or one of the other halachic Midrashim. And I'll explain the content to you, and that is that the language of a prohibition appears with a burnt offering, and that is his saying, lest you bring up. And in another verse, the explanation appears with a command to offer the burnt offering inside, and that is his maybe exalted saying, and there shall you bring up. And that is a positive commandment that one offer the burnt offering here in a place that the Lord will choose. However, the only command that comes for the other consecrated animals is that they offer them inside. What he means by inside is not inside the building, he means inside the courtyard. And that is his saying, and there shall you do, to teach you should not do it outside. But the principle with us is that a negative commandment derived from a positive commandment is a positive commandment. And that is they're saying, I would still say that other consecrated animals would only be with a positive commandment. This means to say that one who sacrifices other consecrated animals would only transgress a positive commandment. That is, that one who sacrificed other consecrated animals outside would only transgress a negative commandment that is derived from a positive commandment. Again, this is part of this bookkeeping, because he's trying to, part of the purpose of this book is to explain to you which are the 365 negative commandments. And there's lots of options, but he had this criteria that he set up before in his introduction. And part of that criteria was that if you infer a negative commandment from a positive commandment, that's still called a positive commandment. This has nothing to do with whether it's forbidden to do it. It's for sure forbidden to do it, but this is about whether it's counted as a positive commandment or a negative commandment. And hence he said, and there shall you bring up your burnt offerings, so as to extend the comparison, and that the other sacrifices be like the burnt offering. So just like one who offers a burnt offering outside is with the negative commandment, so too with the other offerings. One who's transgressed this negative commandment is liable for excision when volitional, and a fixed sin offering when inadvertent. The language of excision, that's karet, the karet level penalty, is found in Parshas Achrimos about someone who brings up an offering outside, as it is written, who brings up a burnt offering or a sacrifice and does not bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting. He will be excised. In the Sifra, again, the halachic Midrash, that man will be excised from his people. We have understood the punishment. From where do we know the prohibition? Hence, we learn to say, take care of lest you bring up your burnt offerings. The language of the Gemara in Zvachim is, the punishment is written, the prohibition is written. The punishment, he will be excised, the prohibition, take care lest you bring up. And the regulations of this commandment have already been explained in the 13th chapter of Zvachim. This very, very technical what he's written here, but there is it represents, this mitzvah represents what is considered a dramatic departure from the way things had been up until then. And the Rambam and other places suggest that this is part of the weaning of the Jewish people away from the practice of sacrifice in the manner that it was done by other people. So having it centralized so that you no longer are bringing it on your own altar, private altars, or even like village altars, that is a departure from what had been the norm, not just amongst Jews, but amongst Gentiles. And then it becomes a unique feature of Jewish offerings, which is that you can only offer them at the Beit HaMikdash. You cannot bring them in other places. These other places are referenced sometimes, like in the Book of Kings, where they're called bamot, and this was an issue that was pernicious. I mean, it was happening even when it wasn't supposed to be happening. The law had already been around for hundreds of years that the only place you can bring offerings to is the Mishkan or the Beit HaMikdash, and so the fact that there would be these kind of local bamot, and archaeologists have uncovered some of these in different places around the country. It's referenced as a pernicious problem that was very difficult to eradicate. Only a couple kings succeeded in really getting rid of them. Hezekiah is one of them, who was successful getting rid of them, but it was a very pernicious problem that either maybe for practical reasons, because it was hard for people that lived far from the Beit HaMikdash to get there in order to bring their offerings, and who knows why else, but it was just referenced as a pernicious problem.
Rabbi, I didn't understand. What's the them again? You said getting them. You're talking about altars?
I'm not sure what I said, but what I mean is, if you are living, let's say, in Beersheba, and it's a couple days for you to get to Yerushalayim, that might be a pragmatic reason why somebody would have set up a private altar in Beersheba, even though this is strictly forbidden and considered a serious violation. Every once in a while, there were things that were strictly forbidden and considered serious violations that maybe they began as a secret, but at some point they started to become more common, and it was considered a pernicious problem. So it might be that it was just hard for the people to travel, and that's why it happened, because of practical reasons, or it could be there were other social reasons that contributed to it, like the fact that in the rest of the world they had these kind of local sacrificial areas. Maybe that was part of it. Whatever the motivation, it was very hard to get rid of. But this is, one of those mitzvahs directly confronting this issue, and according to the Rambam and others, this is a very important step for the people to take, because this is going to help distinguish the process of sacrifice from what the rest of the world is doing. There were quite a few elements that are part of the Jewish sacrificial service that are different from what other people had done, details in the elements. But this would be a dramatic one, that you can only bring it to one central location. That's the only places offerings can be made. That's a very dramatic departure from what had been taken for granted up until the Torah is given. There is some conversation about what the Rambam's position about offerings is. In other words, because when he discusses them broadly, like in the Guide for the Perplexed, he suggests that the initial commandments about offerings are an example of commandments that are being given to people from the place they actually live. In other words, the worldview that they live in, it's not expected to change overnight. So clearly there are mitzvahs being given that they're now obliged to do that are different from what they were doing before. There are a lot of mitzvahs like that. But as far as your worldview, as far as, for instance, how you understand a relationship with God works, that's not going to be something that gets changed so quickly. And therefore, sacrifice is commanded as with that understanding, as a concession. That's what I was looking for, as a kind of concession to where they are. It may not be the ultimate way of serving God, but it is the best way to serve God when you're a people that have grown up in the milieu that you grew up in. But that slowly there will be a kind of conditioning, perhaps away from it. This leads people to believe that, according to the Rambam, eventually we would get to a place where you wouldn't need sacrifice anymore, that you would just have prayer and meditation and you wouldn't have sacrifice anymore. The problem, he doesn't say that explicitly, and the problem is that, as we are seeing in his book of codes, which he makes clear, these are laws that are going to continue to apply during the time of Mashiach, and he spends lots of time talking about the details of sacrifice and the laws of sacrifice. He clearly believes that sacrifice is going to be a part of the life of the Jewish people in a messianic era. There is a possibility that is stated by some who suggest that it could be even during the messianic era that eventually the animal offerings would get phased out, and eventually there would just be something like incense. This is an opinion of Rav Kook in his commentary on the Siddur. But again, that's his opinion. It's not. One thing is clear: the Rambam definitely expects that when the Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt, that there will be sacrifice, just like there was sacrifice before. If you wanted to work out what he meant in his other writings, it's possible that he's expecting that to eventually get phased out, but it would certainly come back. And that's why he's talking about it here, and why he talks about it in his code so extensively. He prohibited us from consecrating animals with blemishes on the altar, and that is his blessed saying, you shall not offer anything that has a blemish. And they said, behold, he transgresses on account of do not consecrate. there are certain disfigurements or injuries that an animal can receive that make them no longer acceptable as offerings. Some of they're discussed like in the Gemara to some degree, but it was expected. It was expected that before somebody became proficient in determining what was a blemish and what was not, they would need to really study this practically. In fact, there's the Gemara in Sanhedrin. Reb Chia was talking to Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi about his nephews. He was clarifying what degree of smicha they have from Rebbe. So Rav, in the discussion, Reb Chia mentioned that Rav had spent a year and a half living with shepherds in order to get to a level of expertise on what was a blemish and what was not a blemish. So this was not considered something you'd just pick up reading about it in a book. It was something that it required work in the field before you were really an expert in it. And we saw before that also people are not supposed to serve, Kohanim are not supposed to serve when they have blemishes. He prohibited us from sacrificing animals with blemishes, and that is saying these shall not offer to the Lord. So the previous one was not to even sanctify them, and this one is not to slaughter them as step one of an offering. And now you have step 3 of the offering, that he prohibited us from sprinkling the blood of animals with blemishes on top of the altar. So in this process, you could transgress several commandments by the time you're finished. You sanctified it, you slaughtered it, and now the blood's being sprinkled. These are not the same person. It's likely not the same person. The owner would be the one that violated sanctifying it. Usually it was a Kohen who did the slaughtering, but it was probably the one who did the slaughtering is not the one who is going to be sprinkling the blood, most likely. So you, in this series of 3 negative commandments, you'd have 3 different people who have violated. And that is his maybe blessed, saying you shall not offer to the Lord. The tradition came to say that this negative commandment would be about the sprinkling of the blood, although there's another opinion that it is from the receiving of the blood. So there are several steps in every offering. There is the slaughtering of the animal, then somebody captures the blood in a bowl. That's what they're talking over here, receiving the blood. And then there's walking it over to the altar and then sprinkling it on the altar. You shall not offer to the Lord is on account of do not receive the blood. But in the Gemara, Tamura, they said, according to the first teacher, why do I need you shall not offer? He requires it for sprinkling of the blood. But behold, he drives it from upon the altar. This is more of that bookkeeping. This means to say from his saying, and as a fire offering, you shall not place. It indicates that anything that is placed on the altar should not have a blemish. And is answered, it is the manner of the verse that it speaks like this, meaning that this negative commandment, and as a fire offering you shall not place on them, is coming about the burning of the innards. You shall not take this as proof about the blood. And he said the altar, as the statement could only be made orderly with it, how else would you say it? And as a fire offering, you shall not place them by itself. Behold, it has been explained from everything above that his saying, you shall not offer to the Lord, is a prohibition for the sprinkling of the blood. Again, this is bookkeeping because he is counting this as negative commandment 94. how is he determined that this should be negative commandment 94? He's getting direction again from the Gemara. He's getting direction from the Gemara that this is, first of all, speaking about the blood, and second of all, that it should be a negative commandment. And then the final one in this series, he prohibited us from burning up animals with blemishes. So you can't dedicate it, you can't slaughter it, you can't spill the blood, and you can't burn the meat. He prohibited us from burning up animals with blemishes, and that is his maybe exalted saying. And as a fire offering, you should not place of them. The language of Sifra and more is, and as a fire offering, you shall not place of them. Those are the fats. I only know about all of them. From where do we know even some of them? Hence, we learn to say of them, even some of them. Behold, it has been made clear to you that one who offers an animal with a blemish has already transgressed 4 negative commandments. When we count the burning of the innards as 1 negative commandment. However, if we count it as 2 negative commandments, like the teacher that is speaking here, behold, he would transgress 5 negative commandments. Now, again, this is not the same person, very likely. This is different Kohanim, but in theory, it could be the same one. For he counts some of the innards as one matter and all of them as another matter, as he said of them, even some of them, even though it is 1 negative commandment. For the teacher holds that we give lashes for general negative commandments. Hence, they said in the Sifra, one who consecrates animals with blemishes to the altar transgresses on account of 5 negative commandments. He only counted 4, but there could be 5 negative commandments here. On account of do not consecrate, on account of do not slaughter, on account of do not sprinkle, of do not burn up all of it, and do not burn up a part of it. Rava says we do not give lashes for general negative commandments. An objection was raised from the Tosefta. One who consecrates animals with blemishes on the altar violates 5 categories. This is a conclusive refutation of Rava. Behold, it has been made clear to you that which they said that he transgresses 5 is with logic that holds we give lashes for a general negative commandment. And hence he counts the negative commandments that include all of them and some of them as 2 categories. What the Rambam's getting to here in his bookkeeping is that it seems from the conclusion of the Gemara that there are actually 5 transgressions here, but he is only counting them as 4 of the negative commandments. So he's explaining to us how that can end up happening, that somebody could technically get lashes for 5 negative commandments, and yet he's only listing this as 4. This is well known as the opinion of Abaye in every place, as we explain in Principle 9 of this essay. According to Rava, however, who says that we do not give lashes for general commandments, one is only liable for 4 sets of lashes for the burning up, as it was explained in the Gemara Sanhedrin, according to that which we illustrated in Principle 9. So together, there are only 4 negative commandments, as is explained in Scripture. As one who consecrates and offers an animal with a blemish is lashed 4 sets of lashes for these 4 negative commandments, as we explained. And all the negative commandments are with an animal with a permanent blemish, as is demonstrated by Scripture, when it said a limb extended or contracted, with its testes bruised or crushed or torn out or cut. Again, there are a list of some of these blemishes, but in order to really know what they are, it would take actual apprenticeship in the field. These are all the permanent blemishes. The regulations of all the blemishes in animals, permanent and temporary, have already been explained in the 6th chapter of Bechorot. And likewise have these regulations of these 4 negative commandments of offering an animal with a blemish been explained in scattered places in Tractate Tamura and Zavachim. So we will take his word for that. He prohibited us from offering animals with temporary blemishes. And that is his maybe saying, you shall not sacrifice the Lord your God an ox or sheep that has any blemish, etc., is explained in the Sifrei, the Halachic Medrash, that the verse is speaking about temporary blemishes, and such a one is also lashed when he transgresses and offers it. He prohibited us from offering the sacrifices of Gentiles when they are animals with blemishes. So we are allowed to bring offerings from Gentiles. These would not be sin offerings or holiday offerings or anything. They would be what we call free will offerings, but a Gentile could ask that one be brought, and we would bring it, as long as that animal does not have a blemish. We should not say, since he's a Gentile, we'll offer an animal with a blemish for his sake. And that is maybe exalted saying, and from the hand of a Gentile you may not offer. When it transgresses and offered it is lashed. This is there was a famous episode described in the Talmud, in I think Tractate Gittin. This is part of the what do you call it? What are those Gemaras called? I have, at this point, can't remember any names. Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. So this is part of a string of stories that discuss sort of the state of the people right before the Romans destroy the Second Temple. So an offended party turns informer to the Romans, and he claims that the Jews are planning a rebellion. They may, on the surface, look like they are loyal subjects to the Roman Empire, but they are really not. They hate the Roman Empire, they despise it, and they're planning a rebellion. And the indication that this is true will be that you'll offer an offering and they won't accept it. He guaranteed that when they, if they would do this, that it will not be offered on the altar. So what happened was, this guy, the informer, got access to the animal and he split its lip. I think he split its lip. So to the Romans, a split lip is nothing. To the Jews, it's this, or this combined with the previous one, that it would be like a temporary blemish, but it would still be forbidden to bring it on the altar. So there was a debate. It went to the Sanhedrin what to do about this, because they understood that there could be terrible consequences if they don't bring this offering. They didn't understand that somebody was going to use this to point to the fact that they're planning a rebellion, but they understood that it would not look good if they don't accept an offering from a Roman official. On the other hand, technically, they're not allowed to bring it. Now, we have seen before that to prevent hatred and especially harm to come to the Jewish people, that you are allowed to set aside prohibitions. And that was an argument that a lot of people were making. But one of the scholars, Zechariah ben Avkulis, said it's a bad precedent. And in the long run, we're going to suffer because of it, because it's going to bring a loosening of people's appreciation for the sacredness of offerings. If they see that you're suddenly taking animals with blemishes. So, and his argument won. His name was Zechariah ben Avkulis. And Rabbi Yochanan made the comment. I think he said because of the humility of Zechariah ben Avkulis, in this case, the temple was destroyed. So that was a story that included this commandment and the previous one. You had a temporary blemish, and you're specifically bringing an offering. The question was, could they bring an offering from a Gentile in a scenario like this? It seems like Rabbi Yochanan disagreed with the decision that they made. Again, this decision is being made like close to the year 70 of the Common Era. Rabbi Yochanan lives 150 years after that, so he's referring back to it as a mistaken judgment, it seems like.
I have a further sort of disjointed question. We talked about permanent blemish and temporary blemishes. I somehow vaguely remember a law that once rejected, always rejected. Where does that apply?
Yeah, so here, yeah, 1 second. Let's ask that question. What do you think? Do you think Perplexity will answer this directly? Do you know what they call it when they make up stuff? When an AI makes up stuff? Hallucination, that's the official term. Where it completely makes up stuff. And I have had that experience. But I've also been filled with wonder at how wonderful it is. I don't even have, they just released a search tool, a research tool, but you have to have like the most expensive chat GPT subscription for that. Okay. As opposed to the free Perplexity here. Here we go. The Talmud. According to the Torah, I have a thought, but I'd rather see if there's a. All right. The Torah prohibits offering a korban sacrifice with a blemish, even if the blemish is temporary, as is stated in Deuteronomy 17:1 and Leviticus 22:25. This ensures that offerings are of the highest physical quality, reflecting reverence for the divine. Additionally, the principle that a rejected offering cannot be brought again is rooted in the sanctity of intent procedure. If a korban is invalidated due to improper intent during its primary rituals, it is permanently disqualified as outlined by the Rambam in Psulei Mikdashim 15:1. This underscores the importance of purity in both the physical and spiritual aspects of sacrifices. So, follow-up question. Can an offering with a temporary blemish be offered when the blemish is healed? So according to this, you can, but I have to see Jewish Virtual Library done. I'm not going to go in Wikipedia. Web shots. All right, general rules. There is a differentiation between there is something called pushed off. It's called dihui. Yeah, so this is, I can see this is an involved discussion. I got taken to this place called webshas.org. So they are just citing the places where the conversation happens. And there's all different circumstances where this comes up. Like, for instance, you had an offering, then it was lost, and then it was found after a new one was already set aside. You picked the wrong kind of animal. Yeah, it's here. So there's pushing it off before it became eligible for the mitzvah or before it was dedicated. So let's say it had a temporary blemish before you dedicated it, and then you waited till it healed, and then you dedicated it. Whether pushing it off can erase eligibility of an item which had been fit previously and then temporarily not fit and then fit again. So what I'm going to say is there's lots of discussion of various versions of this, of that whole business about not being able to bring a korban after it was rejected. So it seems like there's different types of rejection and different different places, and all that makes a difference. But it's a good question. All right, we'll stop here. I went too long. I'm very grateful, and eventually we're going to move on to other subjects, but even these, which start off seeming extremely esoteric, end up without much effort coming back to some place that is relevant to our everyday lives. All right, be well, guys.
Thank you.
Okay,
Right.
yeah. Do I have another question? Do you have a second? Or-
Also, by the way, Mordechai Becher and I came out with another episode of our podcast, and this one is about taking the Torah literally.
Oh,
What are the rules and all that kind of stuff for taking
I
the
have to listen to the first one about music, right? It's,
Yeah,
Well, the-
you don't
oh.
have to listen to any of it.
no,
No,
that
I
isn't
want-
how I meant
I
it.
want to listen to
I,
that.
of course.
And you said that you were going to do one on free will.
Yes.
And I
Eventually.
really want to hear it.
Oh, eventually.
But
Okay.
we'll get
Okay.
there. We'll get there.
Well,
Rabbi, what is the
I
what
listened to it.
podcast do you do?
If you go to, let's say, Spotify, and you Google, you could go to Spotify. You could also
Okay, well,
on YouTube. You can see us, but honestly, it's more distracting to see us than it is, as far as I'm concerned. So if you just do Becher and Karsh, Becher, and Karsh, or Karsh and Becher, it's called Two Rabbis and a Podcast. But you don't have to put all that in. You could just Google Karsh and Becher,
Becker?
Becher.
Okay.
Through your podcast app.
So it could be Spotify or Apple. It's on
It's a lot of fun.
or YouTube.
Podcast app.
Can you do it through, Sharon wants to know, can you do it through the podcast app?
Not sure. I have that podcast app. I think so because it's on Apple, and I'm assuming. Here, let me look here. Podcast. Two Rabbis. Yes. Yeah, it comes up there.
Okay.
Yeah. So on the podcast app on your iPhone, it comes up.
All right. Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay. Be well.
How about you too?
All right. Bye-bye.